Hi, this is Scott Petrie. Thanks for tuning in. I am going to talk a little bit today about DBQs as formative assessments and using DBQs to collect student performance data. And I've given this talk at two conferences now, the California World History Association Conference and the California Council for Social Studies annual conference. And I've got two more coming up. One is in Houston, the Texas Southern University's International Teaching and Learning Conference, and then we're going to present it again at the National Council for the Social Studies Teachers in November in Boston. So this is going to kind of summarize the presentation, and again, it's more of a call to action, defining some common metrics for teachers to use when they use DBQs as formative assessments. So I've been looking at DBQs for about 4 or 5 years now, and I got started because of the great people, Chip Brady at the DBQ project, and he really got me into using DBQs with my English language learners. I've given them to all my 10th graders regardless of skill, from AP all the way down to ELLs. And they're usually very well received, although there's a few drawbacks which we'll talk about. But by and large, I believe that writing across the curriculum, writing for student understanding is essential as we move forward into the Common Core era. So we all know that there is a writing problem in our classrooms. The majority of our classroom teachers assign very little writing, and what they do assign is usually summarize this, explain, write a paper on World War I, where kids can just go to Wikipedia, cut and paste facts. They don't really have to think too much about it. And under Common Core, all teachers are going to have to be writing teachers. And the biggest thing that the Common Core is going to focus on is argumentation. Argumentative writing is going to be 40% for our 12th graders, whereas the informative and explanatory stuff, kids have been doing that for years. They don't need much help with that, but kids do need help learning how to form an academic argument, learning how to cite sources, cite their information in the text, and that's what this discussion is really about. So Common Core, kind of makes all of us become writing instructors, and in order to do that, many of us social studies teachers are going to need to input a lot more writing into our classrooms. So one of the things that's been found in the literature is that writing arguments has higher function than just summarizing things. Writing argument promotes greater audience awareness. So it seems natural to increase the number of writing from sources tasks that include both reading and writing, and document-based questions fit this quite well. Some of the drawbacks that I've heard are that teachers say, well, I'm not going to read 180 essays every weekend. I don't want to assign writing because I don't want to have to grade it. And when you do assign this type of writing, there's several advantages. One of the advantages is that this type of writing, more than anything else, can give you a glimpse into how much effort the student is putting into your class, as opposed to standardized tests that really don't measure effort. They measure what the kids know or if the kids are good guessers. So I have done this program where I have introduced DBQs at 2 schools, and I've measured students where they started, and then after X many of DBQs, after X many of months, where they finished. And I set this up as a goal-setting exercise where I measured word production, the number of words they wrote in a 1-hour period. And I charted that, and I compared that to every class, and I compared that for every student, and I compared how much they started with and how much they ended with. So I'm going to talk about that briefly and how that changed the classroom dynamics. So the first time I did this, the chart looked like this. I just simply wrote down the numbers. I didn't write down the student names. I wrote down the numbers and I charted the mean and the median, and I had told the students that, well, on average, 10th graders can write 410 words an hour. So that's what I expect from you. And once I chart this, I'll put up quartiles and then I'll grade it like this. So for an hour in my classroom, I had students writing as fast and furiously as they could. I scanned all the essays to make sure they were on topic and that they weren't talking about fishing. I did notice that a lot of them copy stuff either straight out of the book and never explain it, and we'll talk about that later. Because students need to understand how to paraphrase, what it means to paraphrase, and also what it means to use text to prove a point or to make a point. So, but for the first cohort with their DBQs, I charted these like this. And you would see the kids jump up, and this would be hanging in my room. They would jump up, they would run to see where they were. And what this gave them, which I don't see a lot of teachers doing, is this gives them the context of where they are in their classroom. Am I better than Susie? Am I worse than Johnny? How come this person can write 990 words, but I only could manage 160? So this was very effective, and it certainly motivated them. And the second time I did this, I'm pausing for station identification, excuse me. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. The lights in my room just shut off automatically if you don't move around and flap your arms like a bird. So the second time I did this, I charted them all and put the students' names on there. And I still graded it the same way, but I was able to, when I collected this data, over time, I had 5, 6, or 7 of these charts all around the room for every class period. Kids would go along and see how much did they improve, how much did they go up. And you would see sometimes that the middle of the road kids would do much better on one DBQ as opposed to another. And you would see kind of sometimes the same names up in the top 5, but a lot of times there was a change. As kids grew more and more confident, they put more and more effort into this. So again, striving for that 410 words per minute goal that they set, you can see this cohort was getting closer. I want you to pay attention to the missing assignments number, because that is something that continued to worry me about this. So after not only would I display the individuals and their course achievement, but I would also start to display the class means as a whole. And I would ask questions to the students as, why is period 8 at 203 words per hour, whereas period 2 is at 410? Why does one class period outperform each other? And then if you look at the number of people with the missing or the incomplete assignments and the people who didn't complete assignments, you can see that there's substantial variation in this. And I want to warn you that without the extensive scaffolding, if your students aren't used to this level of rigor and you haven't put in the necessary scaffolding techniques like having them discuss, having them write short paragraphs, arguing a point or another, doing peer review, pair share with their thesis statements. There's a number of things you can do to give them buy-in, doing the brainstorming in advance and things like that, where now they feel confident with the material, they'll write the essay. But if you don't put in those steps, you get a lot of kids, especially lower achieving boys, that just say, no, I'm not going to write anything. And they'll take the 0 and they'll sit and they'll stare at a blank piece of paper for an hour. And it's it's time consuming and it's draining to get those kids motivated to succeed in this type of program. Next slide is the comparison for both cohorts. And you can see that I had a sizable difference. One was 105, one was 210, but the completion rates were about the same, 70% versus 71%. The increase was between 150 and 200 words. And the course pass rates were also pretty much identical, 72% versus 74%. So I did track other variables, the number of missing days, the number of tardies, what I really noticed is the number of failing students. In cohort 1, boys, males, were twice as likely to fail the class than females. In cohort 2, that jumped up to 3 times. So that, again, is something that concerned me, and there's a lot of stuff in the literature about how do you motivate boys to write, which we will talk about later. So, moving forward, the hope of this video is that I can inspire some teachers to do this work and to develop common metrics for teachers that want to use DBQs as formative assessments. So, previously analyzed measures, I focused on word count or the length. There have been many studies that have also focused on that. There are also other areas you can talk about: the number of claims, the number of rebuttals, what argumentative strategies you use, the number of documents that the kid uses in their essay, the number of citations they put into their essay, the total number of unique documents that they use, and the highest level of document use. So these have all been studied by people who look at historical writing. De La Paz and Felton also dove in deep, and they quantified the number of different argumentation strategies. They found 22 strategies that students tend to write when they're doing an argumentative essay. And any one of these could be your goal, could be the metric that you pick, that you teach the kids to do, and then you focus on measuring. So that's a little food for thought. I want to talk briefly about peer review, which I have done in my classroom with a great deal of success, because in order to not have to read 140, 150, 180 essays every 2 weeks, I developed a peer review rubric that the kids could use online, and they will do peer review. They will read 2 essays, and I will average the scores. And when I do this, and our district has these periodic assessments that we have to give the students, and when they write, I want them to read each other's writing. It's called peer review in college. It's called learning by evaluation in the lower grades. But this proved very effective for me, and instead of having to read 116 assignments overnight, I had my students do it in class on their iPads. They read, they made comments, and it turned out that I had 92 proficient students and 24 non-proficient students. And so after I did this, which honestly I just did to alleviate a personal time crunch because I didn't want to grade all those essays by the next day, when you do this, it's nice to do what they call member checking, where now you have an expert go through and talk about and see if the grades that the students gave are similar to the grades that an expert would give. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. I do want to say that students are capable of giving very cogent feedback, and students are capable of deep thoughts in their writing. So this slide illustrates, how well the students respond to each other's writing and what they're doing. The next slide talks about teacher perceptions and student perceptions. I noticed there's a huge disconnect between the amount of confidence that a student has in writing a thesis statement and the amount of confidence that a teacher has in their ability to teach a thesis statement. So this was about 30% difference. And then when I asked students how confident they were that they could use a document to support their thesis, again, they were about 11.4, yet teachers are confident at about 47.4. So we have high variations in the student and teacher perceptions, and we need to kind of focus and do more work on that. One of the simplest ways I use is poll everywhere. I give students a sample of 3 thesis statements, and they read them, and they talk about them, and then they vote in on which one they think is the best. And when I did this with a group of college professors, the college professors picked the correct thesis statement. 67% of the time. A group of high school teachers picked it, I think 56% of the time, and my